This woman's name is Vicki, and at 32 years old, she made a decision that would unravel her entire relationship in the span of one bathroom trash discovery. What started as a romantic weekend getaway ended with accusations of manipulation, a furious phone call to an ex-wife, and a complete relationship implosion. But here's the twist. Vicki still believes she did absolutely nothing wrong. I'm Emma, and today I'm sharing a story that will make you question everything about honesty, timing, and the invisible lines we cross when desperation meets opportunity. Let me paint you a picture of where Vicki's mind was when this all began. She wasn't some naive 20-something with stars in her eyes. No, Vicki was laser-focused, almost militant in her clarity. At 32, she could hear the ticking of her biological clock like a bomb countdown in her ears. Every month that passed felt like an opportunity slipping through her fingers. Every birthday felt like a deadline she was racing toward. When Vicki met Clayton, it felt like the universe had finally answered her prayers. He was 35, recently divorced, and according to him, his marriage had fallen apart because his ex-wife had promised him children and then changed her mind. To Vicki, this was perfect. Here was a man who understood urgency. Here was a man who had already wasted years with someone who didn't want what he wanted. Here was a man who would appreciate a woman who knew exactly what she was looking for. From their very first date, Vicki laid all her cards on the table. She told Clayton in no uncertain terms that she was looking for marriage and children. She wasn't interested in casual dating or taking things slow or seeing where things went. She wanted a partner who was ready to build a family, and she wanted it sooner rather than later. Clayton, still nursing wounds from his divorce, said he respected her honesty. He said that after everything he'd been through with Miranda, his ex-wife, he appreciated a woman who knew her own mind. For Vicki, this was validation. Finally, a mature man who understood that time wasn't something you could waste on maybes and somedays. They moved quickly, much faster than most couples would after just 3 months. But in Vicki's mind, why wouldn't they? They were both adults with clear goals. When you know what you want, she reasoned, dragging things out is just playing games. Clayton talked about his divorce often, and each time he did, Vicki felt more justified in her approach. He would tell her how Miranda had strung him along for years, how she'd promised they would start a family and then kept pushing the timeline back, how at the end Miranda admitted she'd never really wanted children at all. Those years, Clayton said, were stolen from him, wasted on someone who had lied about her intentions. Vicki listened to these stories and felt a mixture of sympathy and superiority. Poor Clayton, she thought, manipulated by a woman who didn't have the courage to be honest about her desires. But Vicki was different. Vicki was upfront. Vicki would never deceive him the way Miranda had. After 3 months together, Vicki planned what she saw as a pivotal moment in their relationship. A romantic weekend away, just the two of them, at a nice hotel where they could focus entirely on each other. She framed it as an opportunity for Clayton to get away from the stress of his post-divorce life, to escape the reminders of his failed marriage, and just be present with someone who truly appreciated him. But Vicki had another reason for this particular weekend, one she didn't share with Clayton. She had been tracking her ovulation cycle meticulously for weeks using test strips. She knew exactly when her fertile window would be, and she had planned this trip to coincide with it perfectly. In her mind, this wasn't manipulation. This was being smart. This was being responsible about her reproductive health. If something happened naturally during this romantic weekend, well, that would just be the universe confirming what she already knew, that she and Clayton were meant to build a family together. When Clayton asked about the small packets of test strips he'd noticed in her bathroom before the trip, Vicki deflected. She told him they were for tracking her period for general health reasons. It wasn't technically a lie, she reasoned. Ovulation tracking was part of cycle awareness, part of understanding her body. Men got weird about women's health stuff anyway, so why give him all the clinical details? She packed the ovulation tests for the trip, telling herself she needed to maintain her tracking routine. She would be discreet, she decided. Clayton didn't need to see every detail of her health management. It would stay private, stay in the bathroom, stay out of sight. The weekend itself was everything Vicki had hoped for. Clayton was relaxed, more open than she'd ever seen him. They had long, intimate conversations over wine. They laughed together. And yes, they became physically intimate in a way they hadn't been before. For Vicki, it felt like all the pieces were falling into place. This was what a real relationship looked like. This was what two mature adults building a future together looked like. But Sunday morning, everything shattered. Vicki was in the bathroom going through her usual routine. She used one of her ovulation test strips, checked the result, and disposed of it in the small trash can. She always threw them away immediately, never thinking twice about it. The hotel housekeeping would empty the trash anyway. It wasn't something she expected Clayton to ever see or question. But Clayton did see it. And instead of asking Vicki directly about what he'd found, he took out his phone and searched the internet. Within minutes, he understood exactly what those test strips were for, not general cycle tracking, not period monitoring, ovulation prediction, fertility window identification. When he came out of the bathroom, his entire demeanor had changed. The warmth from the night before had evaporated. In its place was something cold, something suspicious. He asked Vicki about the test strips, and she felt her stomach drop. Caught off guard, Vicki repeated her earlier explanation. They were for health monitoring, for understanding her cycle. But Clayton pressed harder. He told her he'd looked them up. He knew what they were really for. Why did she need to track ovulation if she was just monitoring her general health? Vicki felt trapped and exposed. Her carefully maintained privacy had been invaded. The explanation she'd prepared for this conversation suddenly felt flimsy and inadequate. She became defensive, hurt that Clayton was questioning her. This was her body, her health, her business. Why was he cross-examining her like she was on trial? But beneath her indignation, Vicki knew. She knew he'd figured out what she hadn't been ready to admit. The timing of the trip wasn't coincidental. The ovulation tracking wasn't just casual health awareness. She had wanted this weekend to be special in more ways than one. The rest of Sunday was tense and uncomfortable. Clayton seemed to retreat into himself, processing what he discovered. Vicki oscillated between feeling guilty and feeling justified. She hadn't done anything wrong, she told herself. She just hadn't shared every detail of her health routine with him. That wasn't deception. That was privacy. They drove home in near silence. Clayton said he needed time to think. Vicki said she felt invaded and judged. They parted with no resolution, no plan, no reassurance that things would be okay. For 2 days, Vicki heard nothing. No calls, no texts, nothing. The silence ate at her, but she refused to reach out first. If Clayton wanted to punish her for taking care of her health, she decided, then she would give him exactly what he wanted. Complete silence. When Clayton finally called on Tuesday evening, Vicki thought he was going to apologize. She thought they would clear the air and move forward. Instead, Clayton dropped a bomb that would destroy everything they'd built. He told her he'd been doing research. He'd learned that ovulation tests were specifically for tracking fertile windows, not just general cycle monitoring like she'd claimed. His tone was accusatory, like he'd caught her in an elaborate deception. Vicki tried to explain that ovulation was part of cycle tracking, that it was all connected, but Clayton wasn't interested in her explanations anymore. Then came the question that would haunt Vicki for weeks afterward. Clayton asked her point blank if she had been trying to trap him with a pregnancy. The word trap hung in the air between them like poison. Vicki couldn't believe he'd actually said it. How dare he accuse her of being manipulative when all she'd done was be honest about wanting a family? How dare he paint her as some desperate woman trying to trick him when she'd been upfront from day one about her intentions? Hurt and angry, Vicki said something she would later regret, but in the moment felt completely justified saying. She told Clayton that if he wasn't so old, they would have time to wait around and take things as slow as he wanted. But the reality was they were both in their 30s. They didn't have unlimited time. If they wanted the same things, why were they pretending they could afford to waste years? Clayton did not respond well. The mention of his age struck a nerve Vicki hadn't fully anticipated. He accused her of being manipulative, of using biological pressure as a weapon. Vicki accused him of projecting his divorce trauma onto their relationship. The conversation spiraled into a full-blown argument, each of them hurling accusations and justifications at each other. Clayton brought up Miranda again, telling Vicki how his ex-wife had surprised him with her real feelings about children after years of marriage. He said he couldn't go through that again. He needed to be absolutely sure about everything before moving forward. Vicki exploded. She had been honest from the beginning, she reminded him. She had told him exactly what she wanted. How much clearer could she possibly be? She wasn't Miranda. She wasn't hiding her intentions or changing her mind. She was the opposite of what he feared, and yet he was treating her like the enemy. The call ended badly. Clayton said he needed time to think. Vicki told him that if he couldn't trust her after 3 months, maybe they weren't as compatible as she'd thought. Both of them hung up angry, hurt, and convinced the other person was fundamentally wrong. After that conversation, Vicki made a decision. She wasn't going to sit around waiting for Clayton to decide her fate. If he wanted to act like she was a criminal for tracking her ovulation, fine. She could play the silence game too. Days passed with no contact, but instead of feeling sad or heartbroken, Vicki felt angry. She had invested 3 months in this relationship. 3 months she could never get back. 3 months closer to the edge of her fertility window. And Clayton was throwing it all away because he'd found some health supplies in a bathroom trash can. Vicki started posting cryptic quotes on social media. Nothing too obvious, but enough to signal to her followers that something was wrong. Quotes about knowing your worth, about not settling, about recognizing when someone can't appreciate what they have. The likes and supportive comments poured in, and Vicki soaked up the validation like sunlight. She started telling her friends a carefully curated version of events. She emphasized Clayton's paranoia, his controlling behavior, his violation of her privacy by going through her bathroom trash. She painted herself as a victim of a man too damaged from his divorce to trust anyone. Her friends were horrified on her behalf. They told her she deserved better. They told her Clayton had serious issues. The more Vicki talked about it, the more convinced she became that Clayton was the problem. Maybe Miranda hadn't actually changed her mind about kids. Maybe she'd just gotten tired of dealing with a controlling, paranoid husband. Maybe Clayton's marriage hadn't failed because of Miranda's deception, but because of Clayton's inability to trust. Vicki started stalking Miranda's social media accounts. She told herself it was just curiosity, just wanting to understand the full picture. But what she found made her even angrier. Miranda looked happy, really, genuinely happy. Her posts were full of travel, new hobbies, time with friends. She looked like someone who had escaped something suffocating, not someone dealing with regret over a major life decision. This confirmed everything Vicki had started to suspect. Clayton was the villain of his own divorce story. He just couldn't see it. The situation reached its climax when Vicki ran into one of Clayton's coworkers at the grocery store. The coworker mentioned that Clayton had seemed off lately at work, distracted and moody. He said it reminded him of how Clayton had been right before his divorce, all paranoid and suspicious about everything. That comment was the final puzzle piece Vicki needed. This was a pattern. Clayton sabotaged relationships when they got serious. He looked for problems that weren't there. He created conflicts out of nothing because he was too afraid of intimacy, too damaged from his past, to let anyone get close. Vicki decided she wasn't going to sit around waiting for Clayton to work through his issues. She was going to take control. She was going to show him exactly what he was losing by being such an untrusting, paranoid person. And then Vicki made the decision that would seal the fate of this relationship forever. She reached out to Miranda directly through social media. In Vicki's mind, this was a good deed. She was going to warn Miranda about the kind of person Clayton really was. She was going to let Miranda know that Clayton was out there telling everyone Miranda had lied about wanting kids, when the truth was, probably that Miranda just couldn't handle Clayton's controlling behavior anymore. Vicki crafted what she thought was a thoughtful, sisterly message. She explained who she was and what she'd experienced with Clayton. She detailed his paranoid behavior, his trust issues, his pattern of sabotaging relationships. She told Miranda that Clayton was still checking her social media and talking about her to new partners, which seemed unhealthy for someone who claimed to be moving on. Vicki hit send, feeling righteous and helpful. She imagined Miranda responding with gratitude, maybe even friendship. Two women who had both been wronged by the same difficult man, finally seeing the truth. What happened next was the opposite of what Vicki expected. Miranda didn't respond with thanks or solidarity. Instead, she took screenshots of Vicki's entire message and sent them directly to Clayton with a note calling Vicki unhinged and warning Clayton to stay far away from her. When Clayton saw those screenshots, he called Vicki immediately, and he was furious in a way she'd never heard before. His voice was cold with rage. How dare she contact his ex-wife? How dare she insert herself into his past relationship? This, he told her, proved everything he'd suspected about her being manipulative and unstable. Vicki tried to defend herself. She'd been trying to help, trying to give Miranda important information, trying to warn her that Clayton was still obsessing over her. But Clayton wasn't listening. He told her that Miranda had shown him the full conversation, and that it made Vicki look desperate and vindictive. Then Clayton said something that cut deeper than anything else. He said he finally understood why Miranda had been so relieved when their marriage ended, and he was grateful that Miranda had warned him about what kind of person Vicki really was before things went any further. That was it. The relationship was over. Clayton told Vicki he was done, that he didn't want to see or hear from her again. He blocked her on every platform, social media, phone, email, everything. 3 months of building something together gone in an instant. And now Vicki sits at 32, back at square one. 3 months she can never get back. 3 months closer to the edge of what she sees as her reproductive deadline. Clayton wasted her time, got her hopes up about finally having the family she desperately wants, and then threw it all away because, in her words, he's too damaged from his divorce to trust anyone. But here's what makes this story so complicated. Vicki still doesn't see her role in what happened. She still frames herself as the victim of Clayton's paranoia and trust issues. She still believes she was honest and straightforward while he was manipulative and damaged. She doesn't see the red flags in her own behavior. The way she planned that weekend around her fertile window without telling Clayton. The way she deflected and minimized when he asked about the ovulation tests. The way she escalated arguments by bringing up his age and timeline pressures. The way she violated massive boundaries by contacting his ex-wife and trying to rewrite the narrative of his divorce. In Vicki's mind, she was just being honest about her biological reality. She was just tracking her health. She was just trying to help by reaching out to Miranda. Every action, when she tells the story, is justified and reasonable. Every reaction from Clayton is paranoid and unfair. But the truth is more complicated than Vicki wants to admit. Yes, Clayton may have unresolved trust issues from his divorce. Yes, he may have overreacted to finding those test strips. But Vicki wasn't as honest as she claims to be. She was strategic. She was calculating. She was trying to engineer an outcome without giving Clayton full information or agency in the decision. The real tragedy is that if Vicki had been truly honest, if she had said, "Clayton, I'm tracking my ovulation because I want to understand my fertility, and I planned this trip during my fertile window because I'm hoping we might start a family," things might have gone differently. Clayton might have appreciated the honesty even if he wasn't ready for that step. Or he might have told her he needed more time, and they could have had a real conversation about their different timelines. Instead, Vicki tried to make it happen in secret, to create a situation where nature could take its course without Clayton fully understanding what was happening. And when she got caught, she blamed Clayton for being suspicious instead of taking responsibility for her deception. This story isn't about who's right or wrong. It's about what happens when desperation meets dishonesty, when timeline pressures override clear communication, when we try to engineer outcomes instead of having honest conversations about what we want and need. Vicki wanted a family so badly that she was willing to be strategic instead of straightforward. Clayton was so afraid of being deceived again that he saw manipulation in everything. Neither of them could step back and have the vulnerable, honest conversation they needed to have. And now both of them are alone, convinced the other person is the problem, unable to see their own role in the relationship's destruction. The saddest part? Vicki is already looking ahead to her next relationship, determined to find someone who won't need convincing, who won't have trust issues, who will just give her what she wants without question. She's learned all the wrong lessons from this experience. She thinks the problem was Clayton's damage, not her approach, which means she's likely to repeat these same patterns with the next person who comes along. Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves about our own behavior are the most dangerous lies of all. If this story made you think, if it challenged you, or if you found yourself taking sides and then questioning your own judgment, I want to hear from you. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mrs. Emma's channel so you never miss another story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about relationships, honesty, and the lines between desperation and manipulation. I'm Emma, and I'll see you in the next story.